Hi, I'm Gina-R-Farrar, reinvention coach, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap podcast, and leader of this amazing global community of women. If you are approaching midlife or are already in the thick of it, welcome home. Please grab a cup of something wonderful and join me for some real talk, practical strategies, and a big dose of sisterhood. I am so glad you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife and to help you live a more vibrant second half. Today, we are going to be talking about all things anxiety and connection. My guests are the Anxiety Sisters, Abby Greenberg and Maggie Sarachek. They are the authors of the Anxiety Sisters Survival Guide, How to Become More Hopeful, Connected, and Happy. Abby and Maggie, thank you for being with me today.
Oh, thank you. We're delighted to be with you.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about who you are and what brought you to this book, The Anxiety Sisters, this podcast that you have, The Spin Cycle by the Anxiety Sisters. What led you to this specific message?
A lifetime of anxiety. Mags and I, we met in college, before we even knew each other, we were suffering from anxiety. We didn't necessarily know that when we were kids. Like, we didn't have the vocabulary to know what we were feeling. And when we were kids in the 70s, people didn't talk about mental health even as openly as they do now. So, we each struggled with various types of anxiety as very young kids, and all the way through the time we met each other in college when we were in our late teens. And I think we just sort of recognized a kindred spirit in each other. Right, Mags?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We just sort of like saw someone else who had that same panicked expression on their face, and that was it. That's where the magic began. And then we stayed each other's very close friend and touchstone for the next 20 years while our anxiety really, at different times for each of us, debilitated us. And it was during those 20 years where we were building our careers. So, it was like building careers and dealing with anxiety were our two major activities that we did together side by side. And even though we didn't live in the same town, we absolutely were each other's touchstones through the journey every single day. And Maggie says that that's our decade of that one of those decades was our decade of the is.
Yeah,
right?
That was the decade where we just knew we didn't feel well. We didn't necessarily know or believe it was anxiety, but we knew that something wasn't right, and we would have spent any money, gone anywhere, trusted anyone who could offer us some help. So, we went to the acupuncturist and the psychiatrist and the therapist and the past life regressionist and the neurologist and the cardiologist and
the
hypnotist, just about any other is. And some of these people helped us. So I'm not putting anyone down, but I think we didn't really start to get better until we really accepted that what was causing the problem was anxiety, and B, really look to our connection with each other to kind of help us both practically, like, oh, what do I do if this is happening, but also emotionally, like, it's okay. This is what it is. That connection ended up really being very helpful to us. And that is why we started the Anxiety Sisters, because we were a community of two, and we wanted to share the knowledge that we had gotten with other people. So we were a community of two. Now we're a community of 200,000, but we still want to do the same thing, which is always sharing that knowledge and those tips and that support.
Non-judgmentally.
And Abby always says that, which is a true story, we were book people. So we gravitated toward books. So we would, we just remember so well going to all these bookstores looking for anxiety books. And I don't know, Abby, if you remember that one day we were at a Barnes and Noble and we asked the clerk,
yeah.
do you have any anxiety books? And she said, oh yeah, that's my section. Like, those are the books I need. And she took us over there, but we were reading through these books and a lot of them were great. But Abby said, I actually need to leave and go take an Ativan because this is so anxiety provoking, just looking at these books of things we should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can't do because we're too anxious. And so we sort of got this idea as we were getting healthier and healthier, I would say, we had this idea like, we need to write the book that we so wanted and needed at the height of our struggles. I still want and need this book, honestly, but it was a very confusing time and we needed the book that we wrote.
Isn't that the way it is, right? Sometimes you need something and the answer is in your hands. Like you're the one who is now going to be the conduit of what you needed. And that's such a cool story because instead of being diminished by your anxieties and the struggles that you had, you chose to link arms and tell your story to help people change their own story.
I mean, I do have to say that I think both of us felt at times for long periods of time diminished by our anxiety. And, Abby became a professor of communications and was studying all this, different ways we communicate and learn. Self-talk and how we learn things. And I became a social worker, and so I was learning how to be a counselor and organize communities. And so together we kind of had this professional expertise that we really relied on, and then combined with our personal experiences and knowing that anxiety can feel very diminishing at times. And that's kind of what our community is about, not being diminished by your anxiety.
Mm. And it's such an abiding feeling for people who struggle with it that do you find that people have difficulty acknowledging it? It's so familiar to them that maybe they don't call it what it is.
I mean, a lot of people, when they come to our Facebook page and they hear, Mags and I post a lot about the actual experience of anxiety, because even though we feel that the mental health conversation has come very far, especially since we first met 35 years ago, but people will still not know that anxiety can cause the havoc it causes. And people will say, really? That's a thing? I thought that was just me. Because we're very descriptive about the experience. We've been fortunate enough to interview for over a decade. We interviewed and spoke with thousands of anxiety sufferers all over the world. And we were able to share about 200 of their stories in our book in the hopes that people would recognize some of their own struggles because we all experience anxiety differently, even though there's a lot that we have in common with our experience with anxiety. But it's interesting when we post stuff about, a particular individual's experience with anxiety, so many people say, oh my goodness, me too. I thought that was just me. I thought I was crazy. I thought nobody ever had that. And now it's a thing. It has a name. So it's really interesting, really, really gratifying to see that we're able to try to normalize this human experience, because it's a human experience.
Now, my question that I have for you is, could you put some meat on the bones of the word anxiety? When you say anxiety, how are you defining that? Or is there a way to kind of encapsulate it so someone can be like, oh, yeah, that's it?
That's an interesting question.
It's a great question.
It's a wonderful question. I mean, I think that, first of all, we like to say anxiety is it's something that everyone has experienced, right? Like it's one of the human emotions, and it's very protective in many ways, which is why we experience anxiety. It's like if we didn't have anxiety, we would never get off the couch.
No judgment.
No judgment. Been there, done that. But anxiety disorder is really when anxiety gets to run the show in either part of your life or a lot of your life. So we think of it as a disorder when anxiety is making the decisions for you, rather, about where you can go, who you can see, what you can do, rather than you deciding and maybe just feeling anxious. if that makes any sense. So, there's many different aspects of the disorder. Some people have phobias, some people have OCD, some people have panic disorder or just generalized anxiety. But, I know for me at my height of my anxiety, I had a lot of panic and phobias. So there were so many things that I would say, yeah, I can't do that, or I'm not going to do that because, it involved things that would cause me a lot of panic. So essentially, I wasn't making the decisions for myself. My panic was. And I think Abby feels the same in her life at times.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, all human beings experience anxiety because we all have an amygdala, or two. We actually have two. We all have amygdala, and we all have parts of the brain that react to what we perceive as threats. So neuroscientifically, we all experience it because it's human, but not all of us experience it to the point where it starts to run our lives and shrink our worlds in the process.
I think that's the key point, isn't it? That it shrinks your world.
Yes, definitely.
As I'm looking at your book and the table of contents, I love you talked about brain matters. I'd love to talk a little bit about that so that people kind of understand the, I guess, logistics of anxiety. You mentioned it a little bit, Abby. You did. You touched on it. But let's go ahead and get a little bit more of the brain science behind it to help people, because it's hopeful to know that it is something that can be managed.
I have to say, when Mags and I learned that you could see an anxious brain light up on an MRI, it changed everything for us, because suddenly we didn't feel like we were so at fault. There's this thing with mental health or mental disorders where, because we don't see it, because it's not like a broken leg where you can wave a cast around. It's something that's in your head, so you can't see it. And people call it mental, which is very nebulous, right? I mean, what is mental? Where is that? It's sort of, it's up there somewhere. So the thing about knowing that it's actually in your brain, there's a location for it, you can see it on an MRI scan, it really helps you to get rid of that blame and shame that I think a lot of us who've suffered from anxiety and depression and other mental disorders have felt, because there's a lot of stigma out there, even now with such a robust conversation. The stigma is still out there, and that's something Mags and I say: you can learn to live really happily with anxiety, but you cannot learn to live happily with blame and shame. So our reason for two gals who barely passed high school chemistry to start taking neuroscience courses and reading thousands of pages of science and learning to quite enjoy it, actually. But the reason we did that was because we said, wait a minute, this is a real thing, and we want people to stop blaming themselves. So we're going to talk about the brain science so that, people can feel, less blame and shame around the whole process. So, the neuroscience, this is a very, very, very reductive explanation of a more complex process. But basically, your amygdala, which is in your limbic part of your brain, which is your emotional brain, your fear center, your amygdala is sort of the guy who's on lookout for threats. That's the job of the amygdala, is to be the lookout. So when the amygdala perceives a threat, whether it's real or not, when the amygdala perceives a threat, let's say a snake in your garden, okay? So your amygdala will say, oh my goodness, threat, snake in the garden, something slithering. And it sends a signal to a part of your brain called the hypothalamus, which is your command center. And that command center then says, uh-oh, threat, and sets off the warning system, which we call our stress response. That's when you get all those symptoms, right? It's like because it immediately gets your glands releasing adrenaline and norepinephrine and dopamine and all the different hormones that cause your body to go into that fight or flight response. So that's when you start to feel all those symptoms that we talk about, such as, the flushing and the sweating and the racy heart and the dizziness or any nausea or any number of other symptoms. It's because your hypothalamus has told your whole body, we are in trouble. We need to be on high alert now. Now, here's the thing. For your standard human being, your amygdala does that when there's, a pretty real threat nearby, and only occasionally slips up and calls a false alarm. But if you're an anxiety sister, then you have what we call a wonky amygdala, which tends to either be a little trigger happy when it comes to the alerting, or it just works too quickly. It perceives a threat before it even has time to think about whether it actually is one. And so it misfires. And it is an actual thing that's happening in your brain. It's a misfire that sends your whole body into high alert, and you could just be minding your own business in the grocery store.
That is such an empowering piece of information, because if it's something that's, I guess you'd say, physical, meaning there's a part of the brain that's not working properly, that means it can be corrected.
Yes.
Right. We like to say it's a disorder, not a decision. So it is something happening in your brain. It is not something you're deciding to have happen in your brain. Nobody chooses this. And what happens when you're an anxiety sister is you develop these neural pathways that are very, very strong. And these are kind of like these are shortcuts through your brain. So, if you're someone who is fearful of driving, I don't know, you think about driving, and that shortcut through your brain sets off that whole fight and flight response. Mm-hmm. And part of what we talk about is that the hard thing is you have to build new neural pathways so that, you kind of have to sort of rewire your brain so that it doesn't go into that fight or flight every time you are in the car. And doing it is not easy, but it's doable. Not easy, but doable.
It's like what fires together, wires together. So
yes, Abby loves to say that. Yeah.
Right. But the hope in that is that with work and help, you can rewire. You have to diminish what's already wired and rebuild a good wire. And I think that's hopeful.
It's so hopeful because Abby and I both did it. And we've met many other people who've done it. It's not like something that we've done that no one else can do. I always say, like, if I could do it, pretty much anyone could do it. It's something that we both work on all the time still, but in terms of anxiety, we both of us have really rewired quite a bit. We always say it's not quick. There's not like 3 steps you'll be rewired. And it's not easy in any way. But it's doable.
I'm rereading a book by Dr. Carolyn Leaf, Switch on Your Brain. And it's such a good book. And it's really helpful. I love her podcast as well, because sometimes we get in our own head, which I would say anxiety is being completely lost in your own head and your own emotions, and just getting that piece of information that shines the light on the possibility that you don't have to live debilitated anymore, and you talk about it's hard to be happy when you're gasping for air. So if someone listening to this is in that space of like, okay, we're talking brain science, we're talking hope, but they're on that end where they can't see that light. It's there, but they can't see it. What do you have to share for that person?
We've been there. We so get it. I mean, we've been there, and not that long ago.
Not for like a day or not for 2 days. We didn't work it out in a second or two. Go ahead, Abby. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So I would say, so the first thing we say is you are not alone. And in fact, the fact that we have over 200,000 people in our community is proof of that. That, I always say to Maggie, we're in the world's largest sorority with the toughest initiation. So if you're still in the gasping for air stage, first, let's tell you you're not alone. Second, you can get better. There is hope. We show you how in our book to become more hopeful and connected, which we think makes people more happy. And we don't necessarily believe in eliminating anxiety, because for many of us, that's not an option. It's going to be part of our lives. But we do believe in that rewiring and in the neuroplasticity of our brains, that superpower, so that our brains can change. And even though we have these anxiety habits that are really dug in there, those can be changed over time and with practice. You can feel better. You won't always gasp for air. I mean, because between Mags and me, we gasped enough to like fill up every helium balloon in the planet. I mean, and you will breathe again normally. It just is going to take some rewiring.
And one of the things we say is that, come to our community for that connection. Our Facebook page, our Instagram, our website, they're all Anxiety Sisters, basically. And because we think that connection is one of the most hopeful and helpful pieces, connecting with other people who really and truly understand where you are. And it's just so empowering, and it is just so healing.
I agree wholeheartedly with connection, but I think connection with the right people.
Of course.
Right. But I mean, I know you guys are talking about connecting with the right people, but I think sometimes when we are not in the healthiest mental state, we're not always making the healthiest choices for ourselves either.
Well, definitely. One of the things that we say is that when you are in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, when you're in the anxiety response, it's really hard. Your amygdala and your hypothalamus are very strongly connecting with each other, but your frontal lobe, which is where you sort of do your decision making and your planning and your sort of thoughtfulness about what you want to do, that is not working quite as well when we're in fight or flight, because our bodies are just saying like, let's get out of danger. That's the most important thing to do. Not thinking about, is this a good choice for me? Or is this person a person I should trust? So it's hard to be in fight and flight and use your best decision making, which is what happens.
That's a good point, right? Because we're talking chemical reactions and all of these multitude of functions in the brain, right? And something triggers, and then the first thing that seems to happen is the frontal lobe just goes offline.
Yes.
And you're like, what was I thinking? And the answer is, well, you weren't.
Right.
Technically.
And you can't. The brain is designed to shut down that because it wants to devote all its energy to keeping you alive. So that's why, you can see it on an MRI, your whole limbic system lights up, but the prefrontal cortex is blank.
Taking a nap.
Yeah, they shut that down because they need all the horsepower they can get to get your body to either flee from an enemy or get ready to fight.
It's automatic. And I think
it is.
That's why you ladies are saying that it takes work, because your body's used to doing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This is how you quote cope, or this is how you manage, or whatever your word is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we teach our brains by what we think. I think I have to handle it this way, or I think it has to be this way, or I think this always equals this. And I think that's where we develop these ideas, whether it's from our childhood. Maybe we had an anxious parent. Maybe there was an environment that trained us that way. But it's really interesting, because that's the key is in the moment being able to go, wait, stop, wait, pause. No, this doesn't have to be this way. I think it's an awareness thing. You have to become aware of that habit.
We always say it's kind of like, I drive 25 minutes to take my kids to school every day, right? And I drive this route so many times that sometimes I'm like, oh, how did I get here? I'm along the route, and I don't have to think about where I'm going in any way. And Abby knows I have a terrible sense of direction, right? Worst sense ever. But this route, I don't even have to think about. But some days I'm going out on, to a friend's house on a Sunday, and I start driving the school route, right? Because that's my brain has this really fast pathway that I don't even have to think about because I do it so often. And that's pretty much what's happening with us with a lot of different types of anxiety. It's like, what is familiar and what responds to a certain thing is panic mode or OCD mode or worry mode or whatever your type of anxiety is. It's like you're driving there without even knowing it. You're taking that route and you don't know it, and you really have to think, and you really have to practice to take another route. And it's, so you're right on in what you're saying.
But the good news is that with enough practice, that new route can become just as easy to travel as the old route.
Absolutely.
And that's what happens over time. People ask us all the time, do you guys still have panic attacks? Because we've written extensively about our epic panic attacks and some of the things that we've gone through. We both have had panic disorder. And I say, I think I still do get like the beginnings of one, but it doesn't go all the way. It stops because there's a new pathway now. There's a new reaction. There's a new response to it. So it never can develop that intensity that really, that makes you feel like you're going to die. So it doesn't get there for me and Mags anymore. We certainly experience anxiety. We're human, and there's definitely moments, of panic, in my life. I'm a human being, but I don't have those attacks. I don't have to take a medication to pull myself out of that place, because I've found ways to train my brain to take a different route. Right.
Abby always says that, we're wired, we're anxiety sisters. We're going to always be a little high strung, wired for anxiety. Right. But, now we say, okay, anxiety, you're here, you could come along, but you certainly can't drive, so that our brains pretty much know that, yeah, you're going to feel anxious, but you're not going to run the show anymore. It's just going to be something that comes along, so it really diminishes its power.
And also we really, Mags and I, because we're anxiety sisters, we expect to have anxiety all the time. We just expect, that we define ourselves that way. So we're saying we believe that we are anxiety sisters, and therefore we expect anxiety to be there all the time. So it really can't shock us. And a lot of what people struggle with anxiety, a lot of what makes it so intense, is that people get shocked by it. Oh my God, why am I feeling this way? What happened? What's going on here? And we get that because we used to feel that way too. It was very frightening. Like, why am I sweating and nauseated and clammy, at the movie theater? What's going on? But now, after this time of really sort of retraining our responses, it's not going to surprise us. Neither Mags nor I will ever say, oh my God, I'm anxious, I'm shocked. Because we're anxiety sisters, so it comes with. And once we work with people on accepting that, on saying, yeah, I'm an anxious person, so there's a good chance that anxiety might show up tomorrow morning. That makes a huge difference. It takes away all that sneak up on you that anxiety can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of puts you in that place of partnership in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yes.
You're like, okay, this is going to be here. How are we going to do this?
Right.
Right. I was thinking the last time, this was a few years ago, that I had sort of the beginning of a panic attack. I was about to go on I think it was like some sort of physical, you're
going on a boat
trip. It was like a kayaking trip. And I was a little nervous about it. Like, could I keep up? Will I be okay? I'm not a good athlete. So I was a little nervous about it. And I noticed I couldn't eat breakfast. I was feeling really nauseous. And my first thought still is like, oh God, maybe I have the stomach flu. Maybe I shouldn't go on this. And then, but like about 2 minutes later, I might have even called you, Abby, but it was like 2 minutes later, I was like, oh yeah, this is my panic, because I'm worried about this. And, this is what it is. I'm going to get this. But I know also that once I'm on the trip, I'm going to be fine. This is sort of how it goes, because I know that I'm an anxiety sister.
It's like a journey of faith, sort of, isn't it? Because you are stepping out, like trusting yourself to be okay. You're taking the feeling you're having and the reality, and you're kind of looking at them and finding that reality between, I guess.
Well, we also have done a lot of, we always say we believe in preparing for panic. So we've also done a lot of things. We talk about something called the spin kit, which is like a medical first aid kit for panic. how people carry an EpiPen if they have allergies, we have our spin kits. And so we have things in the spin kit that will help our symptoms, things that will distract us from the anxious feelings, things that will soothe our senses, right? So we kind of know the things so quickly that will help us to feel better and get through those uncomfortable feelings, you know, whether that's like a cold compress or a whiff of lavender essential oil, you know, or Abby likes to carry pictures of her cats because they make her feel better instantly. You know, whatever it is that we have in our spin kits, like we can grab onto those things and know, all right, I have something to do. I have a way to get through this.
And what are some of those anxiety management tools that you share with people? What are some things that are practical for them?
There's so many. I mean, we go through an extensive chapter on breathing techniques, all different kinds, visualization techniques, meditation, carrying a spin kit, like Mag said. We talk about something called bookending if you're a worrier. So bookending would be setting yourself up with some sort of a treat before and after a triggering situation. So like for me, it's going to a doctor. Anytime I have to go to a doctor, that's a tough, anxious appointment for me, as I have health anxiety. So I will set up a bookend. I will do my call with Mags, will be my front end of it. And then maybe I'll get a manicure on my back end, or have, you know, some ice cream, or, you know, or watch something on Netflix. But in other words, I will set up for myself a before and after bookend in order to get through it. What else, Mags?
Self-talk. I mean, Abby's an expert and has studied self-talk. So a lot of what we talk about is that having mantras for yourself, like this too shall pass, or I'll be okay. And really talking to yourself in a very, very compassionate way. We've worked with Kristen Neff quite a bit and studied under her, trained with her about how to be compassionate with yourself. Because when we're anxious, all of us, when we're in that fight, flight, and freeze, for many of us, like when we speak to ourselves harshly or yell at ourselves, you know, and who doesn't at times, we send ourselves even further into fight, flight, or freeze. Because you know how it feels when someone yells at you and you're like, so it's really about talking to ourselves as we would a dear friend, talking to ourselves compassionately, so that we can, again, use that frontal lobe that, you know, as we said, when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, often that frontal lobe is not so accessible, but calming ourselves down through self-talk. And Abby always says that the
research
brain
has
hears.
shown that the most important voice in your head is your own. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people, not only should you talk to yourself, but you should talk to yourself out loud, so that your ears can hear your voice telling you it's okay. There's nothing more powerful than that. I'm a huge self-talker, and Mags and I have done workshop after workshop teaching people to do it, and it works. It really, truly works.
Yeah. We always say you need an arsenal of ways to help yourself when you're feeling really anxious, because what works on Monday doesn't work on Tuesday.
And one size does not fit all.
One size doesn't fit all, and one size may not fit you 2 days in a row. Most of us know that feeling, right? So we have a lot of things you do in the immediate, and then we have parts of our book are really about things that we do to keep our mental health, our brain health in the best shape it can be. So there's like sort of the immediate, right now I'm really anxious, and there's like the preventive medicine, right?
Mm-hmm. You know, I was just reading from Dr. Carolyn Leaf. I was reading in her book, and then I caught her on a podcast with Ed Milet, and she was talking about that type of breathing you can use when the frontal lobe goes offline. You know, inhale for 3, exhale for 7.
Yes. And we have that in our book.
But isn't it funny how once you train yourself to do that, my husband, he'll be like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "You're taking deep breaths." So like if something's bothering me, I guess now I use
You're
breathing.
trained.
I've trained myself. Okay, it's time to where am I breathing? And that's something I think that's helpful too. I think when we do experience panic, anxiety, or whatever, one of the first things that happens is we quit breathing properly. It's a very simple tool, but like, am I breathing in the top part of my lung, or am I really getting a few belly breaths in, and listening to that sound of my breath is so helpful. And it does actually flip the front part of your brain back on when you do that.
Well, that's such a great point. It's such a wonderful point. And I always say, we're always breathing properly for the state of mind that we're in. Right. So if I, because we want to breathe, if you're in danger, you want those shallow, quick breaths. And then if you just change your breathing, as you're saying, then you change your whole anxiety response. You're signaling to your body, I'm not in fight, flight, or freeze, actually. Yeah. I'm actually in rest and digest. I'm actually not as anxious as I thought I was. But I also just want to say that, I say this a lot, but for me, it took me several years to really embrace breathing, because when I was at the height of my panicking and phobias, I would try to do these breathing exercises, and I would just hyperventilate. It was the exact thing I could not do, which is sort of what we were talking about in terms of this big arsenal, because we get notes from people all the time. Don't tell me to breathe. Don't tell me to meditate. And we're saying, no, we're giving you options. We want you to have so many options, and then you try them on and see what fits you.
Yeah, the prescription is very personal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think some of the difficulty that we had with the books that we were finding on anxiety is that they would be very prescriptive, and it would usually be with one particular approach. So if that approach doesn't work for you, then what? So we sort of thought of it as, we don't want to add another should to somebody's list. Mm-hmm. If you're an anxiety sufferer, you're already shoulding all over yourself. You don't need anybody else telling you about more things that you in your mind can't possibly do. Because that only adds to that blame and shame piece that we're trying so hard to get rid of, right? We're trying to get us to be accepting and care about ourselves and compassionate with ourselves. And certainly when we feel like we're failing, or we feel like we're not able to do the things we're supposed to do, then we don't feel that, we feel shame. Mm-hmm. And so, that's why one thing about this book is that it doesn't tell you anything that you should do.
Right.
There's not one should in the whole book. It's, here are hundreds of ideas. Try them on, see what works, and don't get too attached to any one thing, because if it works on Monday, it may not work Tuesday.
Right. And I think, particularly as women, but I know as men too have this, and Anxiety Sisters, first of all, is like, we're all genders, all gender identities. It's right. We call ourselves sisters. So that's why it's called Anxiety Sisters. But I think often, I know Abby and I were both told a lot, lose weight, exercise, eat right, and everything will be fine.
Sugar. Stop eating sugar.
Yes, stop eating sugar or gluten or whatever the thing is on that. And none of that, there's nothing wrong with any of that advice. But, I know I was in a situation where I couldn't eat anything. I just was so nauseous from my anxiety. So it was like, anything I could get down was helpful for me to eat. Or if you're stuck in your house, someone telling you to go take a walk is not really that helpful, because you can't leave your house because of your anxiety, or whatever the prescription is. It's like, it might be good advice in many cases, but it is not always helpful, or attainable. And so we just did not want that in our book, that idea. Like,
when I was going through the worst of my panic, one of the doctors I went to said to me, this is the best thing you can do. 30 minutes of really hard-hitting cardio a day. And that will release all these endorphins, and it's going to take away your anxiety. Well, here's the thing. One of my panic symptoms was racing heart. So I was already getting a full cardio workout all day long from my panic. There was no way I was going to be able to get on a Stairmaster while my heart was already going ridiculously fast and I was sweating and clammy and my hands were shaking. There was no way that was going to be possible for me. And it wasn't. And so I didn't follow that advice. And I felt really bad. I felt like, oh, I went to this doctor and he told me how to fix it and I can't fix it. So I'm a failure.
There's such a partnership to it, isn't there? Because we have to know ourselves and we have to take advice as just that. It's advice, even if it comes from a doctor.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Someone was just telling
that's why
us.
they say that the most important voice in your head is your own. They don't say the most important voice in your head is your doctor's. It's yours.
It's yours. Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? There's such a need for gentleness.
Yes. Yes. For that self-compassion, which is even more than just gentleness. It includes mindfulness.
Self-forgiveness probably figures in there somewhere. Like I'm not a bad guy or.
Yeah. And it includes a lot of mindfulness. And then it includes sort of using that frontal lobe to figure out sort of your next steps. Like, it has different components, but there's such a need for that because we know that, it's so easy for all of us to get caught in that blame and that shame. Because really what happens with anxiety is there's often things we can't do and people we can't please. So there's like double blame and double shame. Like I'm not a good mother. I'm not a good daughter. I'm not a good friend. And all of that sends us more into that anxiety response.
Yeah. There's so many things happening that need to be paid attention to.
And I think that, Mags has talked about this a lot, that in terms of the mental health conversation, we have come a really long way and we're really, really, we're grateful for that. And we're so thrilled to be part of it now and to be trying to push it even further. But the one thing that hasn't changed so much is that people don't really, it's like the people now will say, oh, you have anxiety. Oh, I'm sorry. That's hard. I really, like in other words, there's an acceptance now that anxiety is a real thing. Depression is a real thing. This is a legitimate, disorder or illness. But people still don't seem so forgiving when you say, I can't do carpool today because my anxiety is through the roof. And I don't think I can drive today. Then it doesn't, that compassion somehow doesn't seem to be as there as we'd like it to be.
Yeah, I didn't make that wedding. I didn't make your wedding because I had a panic attack on the way.
Yeah, that's still not going to
pretty bad about that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of courage in the journey to put yourself first in the moment. Like, I think it seems like a dance, to be honest, where sometimes you may want to use the tools and get through to the other side. And sometimes maybe you just can't get there like you'd like to, and having that grace with yourself.
As you learn your tools, I would say that I can arrive, and so can Abby, we can arrive at the places we need to arrive at, as we've learned the tools. But this isn't a straight journey. And it's not like, oh, in 2 weeks, you'll have all the tools you need. This is sort of a cha-cha, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it takes a long time to be able to utilize all the tools in a way that allows you to, show up at that wedding all the time or show up at carpool all the time or whatever else it is. And so that's where we really hope people are compassionate toward each other.
Yeah. Now, ladies, as we come to the close of our conversation, I'd love each of you to share 3 takeaways, 3 things that you, from your heart to people that are struggling with anxiety, or maybe even people living with someone struggling with anxiety.
That's good.
Because I think we all need something to be focused on when this situation happens. So Abby, why don't we start with you? What are your 3 anchor points or takeaways for people today?
So the first thing is don't go it alone. Okay. I mean, there are so many kind and wonderful people in the world who are not going to judge you because they share this with you. If you are interested in seeing what that looks like, come to our Facebook page, Anxiety Sisters, everything, or join our community. It's free. It always will be free. And you won't believe the support, the generosity, the warmth from strangers. I mean, people have really become each other's anxiety buddies online in our group. And so don't go it alone. If you're suffering, please reach out to us, and we would like to be there for you. So that would be the first thing, is don't go it alone. The second thing is talk to yourself. Be your own ally and advocate by talking to yourself in a really supportive and kind way. We're so accustomed to saying, oh, you're such a screw up, right? That's what we say to ourselves. But that puts us in fight, flight, or freeze. Let's try saying to ourselves, you know what? You tried. You're doing your best. You know, you're a human being. You're entitled to make a mistake. Nobody is perfect. And I salute your bravery in trying. Just saying that to yourself out loud, it will put you in rest and digest. It will take you away from the stress response, because your body will relax and say, oh, the boss says it's okay. So that would be my second one. And the third one would be, if you're having some real anxiety or panic, to go on our website, www.anxietysisters.com, and push our panic button. It's a button at the top of it's on the right-hand corner of every page. It is free, and no one will come to your house. It's a recording of me spending about 7 minutes with you, talking you through the anxiety. And we don't know who pushes this button, but it gets pushed about 1,700 times a week. Wow. And we get a lot of feedback from people that it's really helpful. So if you're alone and you're freaking out, push that button and I'll be right there next to you.
Fantastic. All right, Miss Maggie.
So I'm going to focus a little more on if you have an anxious child, or you're living with an anxiety sister, anxious wife, husband, whomever, partner. And the first thing is that this is a disorder. This isn't a decision. And we know that gets frustrating, because we want them to be okay, right? But I really have to say, read our book, because we talk about so much about sort of why this is a disorder and not a decision, the brain science and so many other things. And the more that you can understand anxiety and exactly what is happening to someone, the more supportive you'll be, the more patient you'll be. And if you're living with an anxiety sister, you also deserve a lot of self-compassion. You also really need to take care of yourself. And sometimes that will conflict with what your person who has anxiety needs, so sometimes they won't be able to go to the party, but you'll need to go to the party, or whatever else it is. So, have self-compassion for yourself, because being a caregiver to someone with anxiety is hard. And then the third one is for both for the caregivers and the people with anxiety, is to start to find little things that even feel a tiny bit soothing. That might be like watering your favorite plant. It might be, like you said, a breathing exercise, but it also might be, doing some coloring in a coloring book. It doesn't have to be something really big. Just start to experiment with things like even the smallest little piece. That's like that bridge to change the neural pathways, that really small pieces, nothing like, exercise for an hour or whatever. It's really, can you walk down the block? If you can't get out, can you, look out the window at the flowers, whatever it is. Can you pet your cats or your dog? So try to find like the small, soothing, relaxing, joyful pieces for yourself.
Wonderful. Well, ladies, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to be with me today, to share something that is, in my estimation, can be life-saving for people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
they may be alive and breathing, but they may not be living because the anxiety is taking their life away, if you will.
We've been there. We've been there, done that.
Yeah. And
So
I'm
we
so
understand.
grateful.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that you had the courage to take your journey and bring it to a place where it helps other people. I think that is such an incredible gift. And I want to thank you on behalf of people that hear this to have this resource.
Thank you
Oh,
so
well, thank
much.
you.
That is really meaningful to us.
Yeah. So thank you for your wonderful podcast. We really enjoy listening,
Oh,
being on it, but also listening.
thank you so much. That's
We're
encouraging.
road mappers.
Yeah. Woo! And if only I wrote emails more often, but you know, I'm working on it. It doesn't cause me anxiety. I just feel pressure. Maybe it is anxiety, like to be meaningful, you know? And I think anything that we're going through as women in this midlife journey, specifically as our conversation is typically on my podcast, is, you know, this is something that there's an answer, there's a solution. And I really feel that your book is one of those things that is almost, we're not supposed to say should. So let's see. It would be great to help you to pick up this book. Now, again, we just run down real quick where people can find you, the channels that are found.
Sure. So our website is anxietysisters.com. Our podcast is The Spin Cycle with the Anxiety Sisters, and you can find that anywhere you get a podcast. Our Facebook page is incredibly active all day long, and we've been doing these Tuesday night seminars we've been doing these free seminars the last few weeks that have been really fun. So come and check that out on Tuesday nights. Instagram, we are at the Anxiety Sisters. What am I missing, Mags?
You can email us always at absandmags@anxietysisters.com, and we answer all the emails. If you don't get an answer from us within 3 days, we didn't see your email for whatever bizarre reason, but we do answer all emails.
We answer every single email we ever get.
And then our book, The Anxiety Sister Survival Guide, you can, we love independent bookstores. If you can go to your independent bookstore and buy it, have them order it or buy it, that is wonderful. But anywhere you buy books, anywhere you buy books, you will find this book.
Excellent. Well, friends, today I've been speaking with the Anxiety Sisters, Abby Greenberg and Maggie Sarachek. They're the authors of The Anxiety Sisters Survival Guide, How to Become More Hopeful, Connected, and Happy. And if you head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 247, I will have links to all of the ways you can find them. And that panic button is there for you. Don't you forget. While you're at my website, please leave your name and email address and become a part of my tribe. Friends, there is hope. This message is about hope. Is anxiety a real thing? Yes. Is panic a real thing? Yes. But are there solutions to it? Yes. And there's a community out there with the Anxiety Sisters that can help you surround yourself with people who know what you're going through, who are going through it, and who have gotten through to the other side and can help you get there. So if you're feeling these feelings of anxiety and you're feeling that hopelessness, this is your day to connect and find that hope you've been looking for. Remember, it is work, but it's worthy work. You can get your life back. You can live a life that you are happy to live, that brings you joy. Connect with the Anxiety Sisters. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. And if this has helped you in any way, shape, or form, or if you know someone who needs to hear this, please take the time to shout it out, to share it, put it on your pages, direct people to this help and this hope. Thank you so much for listening today. We look forward to sharing more with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.